The scream that shattered the New Year's Eve silence would haunt me forever. Mom, run now. Those 3 words from my dying son's lips turned what should have been a celebration into the most terrifying night of my life. My name is Margaret Parker. I'm 66 years old, and I've called San Diego home for the past 4 decades. After retiring from my career as a high school principal 3 years ago, I thought my golden years would be filled with peaceful family gatherings and quiet contentment. How wrong I was. I had spent the last 6 months meticulously planning this New Year's surprise visit to my son Matthew's estate in La Jolla. At 39, Matthew had built a successful architectural firm, and I was so proud of everything he'd accomplished. His marriage to Samantha 5 years ago had seemed like the perfect addition to our small family. She was 35, charming, and had won my heart immediately with her warm smile and apparent devotion to my son. The $80,000 I had withdrawn from my retirement savings to help them with the down payment on their dream home felt like the best investment I'd ever made. Their happiness was worth every penny of my sacrifice. That evening, I had driven the 3 hours from my modest apartment, my heart racing with excitement. I imagined Matthew's face lighting up when he saw me at the door, just like when he was a little boy, and I would surprise him after school. The house was magnificent. A sprawling Mediterranean-style villa overlooking the Pacific, with manicured gardens and a stunning infinity pool that seemed to merge with the ocean horizon. As I approached the front entrance, the sound of laughter drifted from the backyard. My heart swelled thinking about the celebration in progress. But as I rounded the corner toward the pool area, planning to surprise them, my blood turned to ice. There, silhouetted against the shimmering pool lights, was Samantha. But she wasn't alone with Matthew. A tall, dark-haired stranger had his arms wrapped around her waist, and she was leaning into him with an intimacy that made my stomach churn. The wine glass in her hand caught the moonlight as she raised it in a toast. "To a new beginning," she said, her voice carrying a tone I'd never heard before, sultry, excited, alive in a way that seemed foreign to the woman I thought I knew. The stranger's deep laugh sent shivers down my spine as he replied, "To freedom, darling. Finally, we can be together without hiding." My legs felt like concrete, but somehow I forced myself to move. Matthew needed to know. My son needed to see what his wife was doing behind his back. Every maternal instinct screamed at me to protect him, to save him from this betrayal. I stumbled through the house, my hands shaking as I searched for Matthew. The living room was empty, filled only with the echo of distant laughter from the pool. I climbed the elegant marble staircase, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. When I reached the master bedroom, I found the door slightly ajar. I pushed it open, expecting to find Matthew getting ready to join the party below. Instead, I found my son collapsed on the Persian rug beside the bed, his face ashen and contorted in agony. "Matthew!" I cried, rushing to his side. His eyes, usually so bright and full of life, were clouded with pain and desperation. When he saw me, instead of relief, pure terror crossed his features. "Mom, run now," he gasped, his voice barely a whisper. She poisoned the champagne. You have to get out before she—" The words hit me like a physical blow. My daughter-in-law, the woman I had welcomed into our family, the woman I had financially supported and trusted with my son's heart, had tried to murder him. As Matthew's eyes began to flutter closed, I heard footsteps on the staircase. Samantha's voice, no longer sweet and loving, called out with false concern, "Matthew? Darling, where are you? Our guest is waiting to meet you." I've lived through many challenges in my 66 years, but nothing had prepared me for this moment. My son was dying, his wife was a would-be killer, and I was about to face the fight of my life. If this story has gripped you as much as it has gripped me in the telling, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life stories. I'd love to hear from you. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Your support means everything to me as I share this harrowing journey. Terror coursed through my veins as I heard Samantha's footsteps growing closer. My son was dying in my arms, and the woman responsible was mere seconds away from discovering us. Every grandmother's worst nightmare was unfolding before my eyes, but I refused to let her win. "Matthew, stay with me," I whispered urgently, checking his pulse. It was weak, but steady. Thank God I had taken that first aid course at the community center last spring. Those $200 I'd spent on emergency training were about to save my son's life. I could hear Samantha's heels clicking against the hardwood floor in the hallway. In desperation, I half-dragged, half-carried Matthew's limp body toward the walk-in closet, my arthritic knees screaming in protest. At 66, I wasn't built for this kind of physical exertion, but maternal instinct gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. Matthew? Samantha's voice was getting closer, dripping with false sweetness that now sounded sinister to my ears. I brought champagne to celebrate. Where are you hiding? I managed to get Matthew behind the row of expensive suits, each probably worth more than my monthly pension of $2,400. His breathing was shallow, and I could see foam forming at the corners of his mouth. The symptoms matched everything I'd read about antifreeze poisoning during my years as a school principal when I dealt with various emergency situations. The bedroom door creaked open fully, and I held my breath. Through a gap in the closet door, I watched Samantha enter, still wearing that flowing red dress that had looked so elegant by the pool. But now, it seemed like the costume of a predator. "Matthew, darling, you're worrying me," she called out, but her tone lacked any genuine concern. Instead, there was an edge of impatience, as if she were annoyed that her plan wasn't proceeding on schedule. She moved around the room with calculated precision, checking behind the curtains, under the bed, even glancing toward our hiding spot in the closet. My heart nearly stopped when her eyes seemed to pause on the partially open door, but then she moved on. "He must have gone for a walk on the beach," she muttered to herself, and I heard something chilling in her voice, disappointment that he hadn't stayed put to die as planned. As soon as I heard her heels clicking back down the stairs, I pulled out my cell phone with trembling fingers. No signal. Of course, Matthew had mentioned that the house was in a cellular dead zone, which was part of its charm. They relied on landlines and Wi-Fi. I spotted the bedside phone and carefully crept out of the closet, leaving Matthew as safe as I could make him. Every second counted now. I dialed 911 with shaking hands. 911, what's your emergency? My son has been poisoned, I whispered urgently. We need an ambulance immediately at 1247 Ocean View Drive, La Jolla. The person who poisoned him is still in the house. Ma'am, can you speak up? Is the victim conscious? I can't speak louder. The perpetrator is nearby. Send police and paramedics now. Tell them to look for ethylene glycol poisoning. The victim is Matthew Parker, age 39. After giving the dispatcher all the crucial information, I hung up and hurried back to Matthew. His condition was deteriorating. The $50,000 life insurance policy he'd mentioned taking out last year flashed through my mind. Was that part of Samantha's plan all along? From downstairs, I could hear Samantha entertaining her male companion. Their laughter echoed through the house like a soundtrack to a nightmare. How could she be celebrating while my son lay dying upstairs? I rummaged through Matthew's dresser drawer and found a bottle of vodka, a housewarming gift we'd never opened. I knew from my reading that alcohol could potentially slow the absorption of antifreeze, buying us precious time until help arrived. "Matthew, I need you to try to swallow this," I whispered, tilting small amounts of vodka into his mouth. It might help counteract the poison. His eyes fluttered open briefly, focusing on me with tremendous effort. "Mom," he breathed, "the papers, in my office safe. The combination is your birthday. She's been forging my signature." Before he could say more, his eyes closed again, but I could see his chest still rising and falling. Whatever Samantha had given him, she'd miscalculated the dosage. My son was a fighter, just like I'd raised him to be. The distant sound of sirens filled me with relief, but also terror. Would they arrive in time? And what would Samantha do when she realized her plan was falling apart? As if summoned by my thoughts, I heard those dreaded heels on the stairs again, this time moving with urgency. "Matthew," she called out, and this time there was no pretense in her voice. "Where the hell are you?" I pressed myself against the closet wall, my heart hammering so loud I was sure she could hear it. The sirens were getting closer, but so was Samantha. The next few minutes would determine whether my son lived or died, and whether I would survive to tell this horrific tale. Through the crack in the closet door, I watched her enter the room again, and this time I saw something that made my blood freeze. A syringe in her hand, filled with clear liquid. She wasn't done trying to kill my son. The syringe in Samantha's hand gleamed under the bedroom's crystal chandelier, like an instrument of death. My 66-year-old heart was beating so hard I thought it might give out, but I couldn't let fear paralyze me. Not when my son's life hung in the balance. She moved through the room like a predator hunting prey, methodically checking every corner. The sirens were getting closer, maybe 5 minutes away at most, but I knew she could kill Matthew in seconds with whatever was in that syringe. "I know you're in here, Matthew," she hissed, her voice stripped of all pretense now. "That old bat's car is in the driveway. Did Mommy come to save her precious boy?" The contempt in her voice when she mentioned me sent rage coursing through my veins. This woman had taken my $80,000, lived in luxury off my son's success, and now she was planning to murder him. The fury gave me courage I didn't know I still possessed. As she approached the closet, I made a split-second decision. I burst through the doors, startling her so badly that she stumbled backward. "Get away from my son!" I shouted, placing myself between her and Matthew's unconscious form. Samantha's beautiful face contorted into an ugly mask of hatred. "You stupid old woman, you've ruined everything." "I've ruined your murder plot, you mean," I shot back, surprised by the steel in my own voice. "The police are coming, Samantha. It's over." She laughed, a cold, calculating sound that made my skin crawl. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Do you have any idea what I've been planning? This house, the business, the $300,000 in life insurance, it's all going to be mine." "300,000?" I gasped. Matthew said 50,000. "Your precious son has been so busy building his little empire, he hasn't been paying attention to the policies I've been taking out in his name. Did you know he's worth more dead than alive? Almost $500,000 total, plus this house worth $2.3 million. The cold calculation in her voice was horrifying. She'd been systematically planning this for months, maybe years. "And your boyfriend downstairs?" I demanded, trying to keep her talking as the sirens grew louder. "Is he part of this sick plan? David's been waiting for me to be free for 2 years. He's the contractor who's been renovating our beach house. Guess where all those renovation payments actually went? Into our private account in the Cayman Islands. Almost $150,000 of Matthew's own money, funding our new life together." I felt sick. Every detail she revealed showed just how thoroughly she'd betrayed my son's trust. "You're insane if you think you'll get away with this." "Oh, but I will," she said, raising the syringe. "You see, I'm going to give Matthew this lethal dose of insulin, then inject you with a little something too. When the police arrive, they'll find a tragic scene. Grandmother has a heart attack, discovering her diabetic son died from an insulin overdose. So sad, so believable." "Matthew isn't diabetic," I said, backing toward the window. "He will be, according to the medical records I've been creating. Amazing how easy it is to forge doctor's notes when you used to work in medical billing. I've been documenting his condition for 6 months. The level of premeditation was staggering. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign of deception and murder. "You won't get away with this," I said again, but my voice wavered. "Watch me," she sneered, lunging toward me with the syringe. I grabbed the first thing I could reach, a heavy crystal paperweight from Matthew's nightstand, and swung it with every ounce of strength in my aging body. It connected with her wrist with a satisfying crack, and the syringe went flying across the room, shattering against the far wall. Samantha screamed in pain and fury, cradling her injured wrist. "You broke my wrist, you old hag!" "Good," I panted, still gripping the paperweight. "That's nothing compared to what you've done to my son." She lunged at me again, this time with her uninjured hand reaching for my throat. Despite being 30 years younger, her balance was off from the pain, and I managed to sidestep her attack. She crashed into the dresser, sending expensive perfume bottles cascading to the floor. The bedroom door burst open, and David, the man from the pool, stood there taking in the scene. He was younger than Samantha, maybe early 30s, with the build of someone who worked with his hands. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded. "The police are pulling into the driveway!" "Help me!" Samantha screamed. "She's ruined everything!" But instead of helping her, David's face went pale as he processed what he was seeing. Matthew unconscious on the floor, the broken syringe, Samantha's obvious guilt written all over her face. "Jesus, Sam, you said he'd just sign the papers and leave town. You never said anything about killing him." "You naive fool," she spat. "Did you really think he'd just hand over millions and walk away? He had to die." David stared at her in horror. I thought you were getting divorced. I never signed up for murder." The sound of heavy footsteps thundering up the stairs filled the room. Help had finally arrived. but the nightmare was far from over. "Police, don't move!" The commanding voice boomed through the bedroom as 3 officers burst through the door, weapons drawn. Behind them, paramedics rushed toward Matthew's motionless form. I had never been so relieved to see law enforcement in my entire 66 years. My legs finally gave out, and I sank to the floor beside my son as the paramedics took over. "Ma'am, we need you to step back," one of the EMTs said gently but firmly. "We've got him now." Through my tears, I watched them work on Matthew with practiced efficiency. One checked his vitals, while another started an IV. "Possible ethylene glycol poisoning," I told them. "Antifreeze, and there might be alcohol interaction. I gave him vodka to slow absorption." The lead paramedic nodded approvingly. Smart thinking. That might have saved his life. Meanwhile, the police had Samantha and David in handcuffs. Samantha's broken wrist was swelling, but she showed no remorse, only fury at being caught. "This is ridiculous," she shouted. "That old woman attacked me. I was defending myself." Detective Rodriguez, a woman about my son's age with kind but sharp eyes, knelt beside me. "Mrs. Parker, I'm going to need you to tell me everything that happened tonight." As the paramedics loaded Matthew onto a stretcher, I poured out the entire horrific story. The detective's expression grew darker with each detail. "Mrs. Parker, when you mentioned documents in a safe, did you see anything specific?" "Matthew said something about forged signatures before he lost consciousness," I explained. "The safe combination is my birthday, October 15th, 1959. Detective Rodriguez turned to Officer Chen. "Get a warrant for that safe. Also, we need to search this entire house and get forensics up here immediately." As they wheeled Matthew toward the ambulance, he briefly opened his eyes and squeezed my hand. "Mom," he whispered weakly. "Thank you." Those 2 words gave me more strength than all the coffee and determination in the world. My boy was going to survive. At the hospital, while Matthew underwent emergency treatment to flush the poison from his system, Detective Rodriguez and I went through everything again in detail. She recorded my statement while I sipped terrible coffee from a styrofoam cup, my hands still shaking. "Mrs. Parker, we found some very interesting things in that safe," she said after returning from the house. "It appears your son has been documenting his wife's suspicious behavior for several weeks. Hidden cameras, financial records, even recordings of phone conversations." My heart raced. He knew? It looks like he suspected something, but was trying to gather evidence. There are photos of Samantha and David together, dating back months, records of unauthorized transfers from business accounts, and forged checks totaling over $200,000. The betrayal was even worse than I'd imagined. Not only had Samantha been planning to murder my son, but she'd been systematically stealing from him for months. "There's more," Detective Rodriguez continued grimly. "We found a life insurance policy that Matthew never signed. The signature is clearly forged. Your son's real signature is quite different. She's been creating false medical records, documenting a diabetes condition that doesn't exist, and building a paper trail to support an insurance claim." "How long has this been going on?" I asked, feeling sick to my stomach. "Based on what we've found, at least 8 months. She's been very methodical. Bank records show regular transfers to an offshore account, always in amounts just below the federal reporting threshold. She's stolen close to $400,000 total. I thought about my own $80,000 contribution to their house down payment. Detective, I gave them money for their home. Was that part of her plan too?" "I'm afraid so. The down payment you provided went directly into the same account she's been using to fund her escape plan. She never intended to use it for the house." The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. Not only had she tried to murder my son, but she'd stolen my life savings in the process. My retirement money, saved penny by penny over decades of teaching, was gone. "What happens now?" I asked. "Samantha is facing charges of attempted murder, fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. David appears to be a co-conspirator in the financial crimes, but claims he didn't know about the murder plot. His cooperation will determine his sentence. Can we recover the stolen money?" Detective Rodriguez's expression was sympathetic but realistic. "We'll do everything we can, but offshore accounts are complicated. It might take months or years, and there's no guarantee we'll recover everything." Dr. Hassan, Matthew's attending physician, approached us with good news. "Your son is going to make a full recovery. The alcohol you gave him did slow the absorption rate significantly. Without that intervention, and without getting him here when you did, the outcome would have been very different. Relief flooded through me like a warm wave. My son was alive. My quick thinking had saved him. At 66, I had faced down a killer and won. But even as I celebrated Matthew's survival, I couldn't help but think about the long road ahead. The financial damage was devastating, the emotional trauma would take time to heal, and the legal battle was just beginning. Little did I know that Samantha had one more devastating surprise waiting for us, one that would threaten everything we'd fought to save. 3 days after the nightmare began, I was sitting beside Matthew's hospital bed when Detective Rodriguez arrived with news that would shatter what remained of our world. "Matthew, I'm glad to see you're feeling better," she said, pulling up a chair. Her expression was grave. "But I'm afraid there are some developments you both need to know about." My son had been recovering well. The doctors had successfully flushed most of the poison from his system, though his kidneys would need monitoring for months. The emotional recovery, however, was proving much more difficult. "What is it?" Matthew asked weakly. Even after 3 days, he still looked pale and fragile. "We've been analyzing the evidence from your safe and Samantha's computer," Detective Rodriguez began carefully. "Matthew, how long did you say you'd been married?" 5 years this March, he replied, confusion clouding his features. "I'm afraid that's not accurate." She opened her folder and pulled out several documents. "Samantha was never legally divorced from her previous husband. Your marriage isn't valid." The words hit like a physical blow. I watched my son's face crumble as the implications sank in. "That's impossible," I whispered. "I was at their wedding. I saw the marriage certificate." The certificate was falsified, very professionally done, but fake nonetheless. We contacted her previous husband in Phoenix. He had no idea she was even living in California, let alone that she'd remarried. Matthew stared at the ceiling, processing this betrayal on top of everything else. "So she's a bigamist and a would-be murderer." "It gets worse," Detective Rodriguez continued reluctantly. "The previous husband, James Morrison, has been paying her alimony for the past 6 years. $3,000 a month, which she's been collecting while living as your wife. That's another $180,000 in fraud." I felt dizzy. Every detail revealed new layers of deception. "How could we have been so blind?" "She's very good at what she does," the detective said. "We've discovered this isn't her first time. There are at least 2 other men in different states who've reported similar experiences. She targets successful men, gains their trust, and then systematically destroys them financially." "A serial fraud," Matthew said bitterly. "And I fell for it completely." Detective Rodriguez pulled out another document. "There's something else. The house you're living in? She's been making payments to a second mortgage that you apparently don't know about. She took out a $400,000 home equity loan using your forged signature." My son sat up despite his weakness. "What? That's impossible. I never signed any loan documents." "We have the paperwork. Your signature is forged, but it's very convincing. She's been using that money to fund her lifestyle and her escape plan. The house now has a total debt of $1.2 million against its $2.3 million value." I calculated quickly in my head. Between the stolen business funds, the fraudulent loans, and my own $80,000 contribution, Samantha had managed to steal or misappropriate over $800,000. "How could the bank approve a loan without Matthew being present?" I demanded. "She had power of attorney documents, also forged, that gave her the authority to sign on his behalf for financial matters. She presented them as being for convenience while he was traveling for business." Matthew looked devastated. At 39, he'd built a successful architectural firm and thought he'd found the love of his life. Now he was discovering that the past 5 years had been an elaborate con game. "What about my business?" he asked. "Is that safe?" Detective Rodriguez's hesitation told us everything we needed to know. "She's been stealing from business accounts for months, but there's more. She's also been signing contracts in your name, committing the firm to projects with impossible timelines and budgets. Some of your clients are threatening lawsuits for breach of contract." The scope of the damage was overwhelming. It wasn't just personal betrayal. Samantha had potentially destroyed Matthew's professional reputation and his livelihood. "How much am I looking at in total losses?" he asked quietly. "Between direct theft, fraudulent loans, forged contracts, and potential legal settlements, you could be looking at over $1.5 million in damages. The business might not survive." I watched my son absorb this devastating news. He'd worked for 15 years to build his firm, and now it might all be lost because of one woman's greed and manipulation. "There's one more thing," Detective Rodriguez said softly. "We found evidence that she was planning to disappear on New Year's Day. Plane tickets to the Cayman Islands, where the offshore accounts are located. If you hadn't discovered her that night, she would have been gone by morning, and you would have been found dead in your bedroom." The timing was chilling. She'd planned Matthew's murder down to the hour, ensuring she'd be safely out of the country before his body was discovered. "What are our options for recovery?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. "We're working with international authorities to freeze the offshore accounts, but that process can take months. She's hired expensive lawyers, and she's claiming everything was consensual, that Matthew knew about all the financial transactions." "That's ridiculous," I exclaimed. "Of course it is, but it complicates prosecution. She's very smart and very prepared. This won't be an easy case to win." As Detective Rodriguez left us alone to process this information, I looked at my son lying in that hospital bed. He'd lost his wife, his marriage, potentially his business, and most of his assets. At 66, I felt responsible. I'd welcomed Samantha into our family, trusted her, even funded her schemes with my own retirement savings. But I also felt something else burning in my chest: determination. Samantha had underestimated what this family was capable of when we fought back. She was about to learn that stealing from the Parkers came with consequences she hadn't anticipated. The real battle was just beginning. 2 weeks after Matthew's release from the hospital, we sat in the offices of Patterson and Associates, the best criminal defense attorney we could afford. The $5,000 retainer fee came from what little remained in my emergency savings, money I'd hoped never to touch. "I'll be direct with you," said Sandra Patterson, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who specialized in complex fraud cases. "Samantha Klein, or whatever her real name is, has done this before, and she's very good at covering her tracks." Matthew still looked pale and drawn, but his determination was growing stronger each day. The doctors had cleared him to return to work, though his business was hanging by a thread. 3 major clients had already canceled projects worth $180,000 in total revenue. "What are we dealing with exactly?" he asked. Patterson opened a thick file. "Legally, she's facing charges of attempted murder, aggravated fraud, identity theft, bigamy, and racketeering. The district attorney is treating this as organized crime because of the pattern with other victims." "Other victims?" I asked. "We've identified 4 men in 3 different states who've fallen prey to similar schemes. The FBI is now investigating her as part of a larger fraud ring. Total damages across all cases exceed $3.2 million. The scope was staggering. We weren't just dealing with a greedy wife. We were confronting a professional criminal. "What's the likelihood of conviction?" Matthew asked. "For the attempted murder, very high. You're alive to testify, and the physical evidence is overwhelming. For the financial crimes, it's more complicated. She's claiming everything was consensual, that you knew about and approved all the financial transactions." "That's absurd," I interjected. "Matthew was gathering evidence against her, which works in our favor, but her defense team is very skilled. They're arguing that Matthew's surveillance was part of an elaborate scheme to frame Samantha for divorce proceedings, not evidence of her criminal activity." Patterson pulled out another document. "However, we have some advantages. The bigamy charge is ironclad. She can't claim that was consensual since it's inherently fraudulent, and the forged signatures are our strongest evidence. We have a handwriting expert who can testify that several key documents were definitely not signed by Matthew." "What about financial recovery?" I asked. That $80,000 represented my entire emergency fund, and Matthew's business was hemorrhaging money daily. "We filed liens against all her known assets, but most of the money has been moved offshore. We're working with the State Department and Interpol to freeze the accounts, but she's had months to move funds through multiple jurisdictions." Matthew leaned forward, despite his obvious fatigue. "Sandra, I need to know. Can I save my business? That depends largely on your client's willingness to work with you, and whether we can prove that the contracts were signed without your knowledge. Some of the agreements she made are so unrealistic that any reasonable person should have known they were fraudulent. She committed my firm to design and build a $2.8 million project in just 4 months, Matthew explained. Any architect would know that's impossible. That actually helps us. It demonstrates that she was deliberately creating impossible situations, likely to damage your business reputation. We can argue that destroying your livelihood was part of her overall plan. Patterson's assistant knocked and entered. "Ms. Patterson, the prosecutor's office called. Samantha's attorney wants to discuss a plea bargain." My heart raced. What kind of plea bargain? Typically, in cases like this, they offer to plead guilty to lesser charges in exchange for cooperation in identifying other victims and assistance in asset recovery. Matthew and I exchanged glances. The idea of Samantha getting a reduced sentence made my blood boil, but if it meant recovering our stolen money, what would that look like? Matthew asked. Probably pleading guilty to fraud instead of attempted murder, serving maybe 3 to 5 years instead of 25 to life. In exchange, she provides full disclosure of all hidden assets and offshore accounts. Absolutely not, I said firmly. She tried to kill my son. She should face the full consequences. Patterson nodded understandingly. I appreciate your position, Mrs. Parker, but consider this. If we go to trial on all charges and lose, you get nothing back. If she pleads guilty and cooperates, you might recover 60–70% of your losses. The financial reality was harsh. Matthew's business owed $340,000 in outstanding contracts that Samantha had signed. His personal debts now totaled over $800,000. My retirement savings were gone. We needed that money back, or we'd all face financial ruin. How long do we have to decide? Matthew asked. The offer expires in 72 hours. The prosecutor wants to move quickly. There are other victims in other states who are also pressing for resolution. As we left the attorney's office, I felt the weight of an impossible decision. Justice demanded that Samantha face the full consequences of trying to murder my son. But practical reality demanded that we consider any path that might help us rebuild our shattered lives. What do you think we should do? Matthew asked as we sat in my car in the parking garage. I think, I said slowly, that we need to hear exactly what she's offering before we make any decisions. But Matthew, I want you to know, whatever we decide, we're going to get through this together. He reached over and squeezed my hand. Mom, I'm so sorry you got dragged into this mess. Don't you dare apologize, I said firmly. You're my son, and protecting you is what mothers do. At 66, I'm not about to stop now. Little did we know that Samantha's plea offer would come with conditions that would test our family bonds in ways we never imagined. The next 72 hours would determine not just our financial future, but whether justice would truly be served. The call came at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, jolting me from the first decent sleep I'd had in weeks. Detective Rodriguez's voice was tense with urgency. Mrs. Parker, we have a problem. Samantha posted bail last night. I sat up in bed, instantly wide awake. What? How is that possible? You said she was being held without bail. Her attorney filed an emergency appeal claiming new evidence. A judge granted bail at $2 million. Someone posted it anonymously through a bond company. My blood ran cold. Where is she now? That's the problem. We don't know. She's supposed to check in daily, but she missed her first appointment this morning. We think she's planning to run. I was already getting dressed, my hands shaking as I pulled on yesterday's clothes. What about the offshore accounts? I thought you were freezing them. We did freeze the accounts we knew about, but there might be others. Mrs. Parker, I need you and Matthew to be very careful. People in her situation sometimes do desperate things. After hanging up, I immediately called Matthew. His phone went straight to voicemail. Panic rising, I drove the 20 minutes to his temporary apartment. He'd moved out of the La Jolla house, which was now tied up in legal proceedings. When I arrived at his building, something felt wrong. His car was in the parking lot, but the curtains in his apartment were drawn tight. I used the spare key he'd given me and let myself in. Matthew, I called out. Silence. The apartment was empty, but signs of a struggle were obvious. A lamp was knocked over. His coffee mug was shattered on the kitchen floor, and his cell phone was lying under the couch, the screen cracked. My heart hammering, I called 911 for the second time in a month. She has my son, I told Detective Rodriguez when she arrived with backup. Samantha has kidnapped Matthew. The next several hours blurred together in a haze of police interviews, crime scene technicians, and growing terror. They found evidence that Matthew had been forcibly removed from his apartment sometime between 10 p.m. the previous night and 6 a.m. that morning. We've issued an Amber Alert and put out a BOLO on Samantha's vehicle, Detective Rodriguez explained. But Mrs. Parker, I have to ask, is there anywhere she might take him? Anywhere that might be significant to their relationship? I racked my brain. thinking of all the places Matthew had mentioned over the years. The beach house, I said suddenly. She mentioned renovations to a beach house. That's where she met David, the contractor. Do you know where? No, but Matthew's business files might have records if he was paying for the renovations. Within an hour, we had a team searching through Matthew's office computers. His bookkeeper, Maria, worked with the police to trace payments made to Coastal Construction Services, David's company. Here, Maria said, pointing to a series of payments totaling $89,000 over the past year. These all went to work on 1247 Pacific Coast Highway, Encinitas, but Mr. Parker never mentioned having a beach house. Because he didn't know about it, I realized, with growing horror. She was using his money to renovate a house she owned separately, preparing for their escape. Detective Rodriguez was already coordinating with local law enforcement in Encinitas. As we raced toward the coast, my mind kept spinning through worst-case scenarios. Samantha had already tried to kill Matthew once. Now, facing life in prison, and with her carefully laid plans falling apart, what would she do to the son I'd worked so hard to save? The beach house was a modest two-story structure set back from the road, surrounded by overgrown vegetation that provided perfect cover. 2 police cars were already positioned out of sight when we arrived, and SWAT officers were moving into position. Mrs. Parker, you need to stay back, Detective Rodriguez said firmly. If she sees you, it might escalate the situation. Through binoculars, we could see movement inside the house. Samantha appeared briefly at an upstairs window, confirming that she was indeed inside. But where was Matthew? We're going to try to establish communication, the SWAT commander explained. Sometimes we can resolve these situations without violence. The next 30 minutes felt like hours. The phone calls to the house went unanswered. Finally, Samantha appeared on the second-floor balcony, and my heart nearly stopped. She was holding a gun to Matthew's head. "I want safe passage to Mexico," she shouted down to the officers. "And I want the offshore accounts unfrozen. You have 1 hour." Matthew looked terrible. Pale, weak, probably still recovering from the poisoning. He could barely stand upright, leaning heavily against the balcony railing. "Mrs. Parker," Detective Rodriguez said quietly. "She's asking to speak with you." "Me?" "She says she'll only negotiate with Matthew's mother. She's specifically requested you." Every instinct told me not to trust Samantha, but Matthew's life hung in the balance. If talking to her could save him, I had to try. The negotiator handed me a bullhorn. "Keep her talking," he instructed. "The longer we can stretch this out, the better our chances of resolving it safely." I took the device with trembling hands. "Samantha," I called out, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Let's talk." "Margaret," she replied, and I could hear the desperation in her voice even from a distance. "You destroyed everything. All my plans, all my work, ruined by an interfering old woman." "I saved my son's life," I called back. "What you did was evil." "What I did was necessary," she screamed. "Do you have any idea how hard it is to start over at 35? I needed that money. I deserved it." I looked at my son, held hostage by a woman he'd loved and trusted. At 66, I'd thought my days of fighting for my family were behind me. But mothers never stop protecting their children, no matter how old we get. "Samantha, you're a smart woman," I said into the bullhorn. "You know this can't end well. Let Matthew go, and we can work something out." Her laugh was bitter and unhinged. "Work something out? I'm facing life in prison because of you. There's nothing left to work out." The gun pressed tighter against Matthew's temple, and I saw him close his eyes. In that moment, I knew words alone wouldn't be enough. Samantha was beyond reason, beyond negotiation. She was cornered and dangerous, and my son was running out of time. But I hadn't survived 66 years and raised a son as a single mother by giving up when things got tough. If Samantha wanted a fight, she was about to learn what a desperate mother was capable of. The standoff stretched into its second hour as the sun began to set over the Pacific. Samantha's demands grew more erratic and desperate with each passing minute. She wanted a helicopter, then a boat, then demanded that all charges be dropped. The police negotiator kept trying to reason with her, but I could see that she was spiraling toward a breakdown. "Mrs. Parker," Detective Rodriguez said quietly, "the sniper team is in position, but they don't have a clear shot without risking Matthew. She's using him as a human shield very effectively." I watched my son through binoculars. He was swaying on his feet, clearly struggling with exhaustion and the lingering effects of the poisoning. How much longer could he hold on? What if I go up there? I said suddenly. Absolutely not, the SWAT commander responded immediately. We cannot put another civilian at risk, but she specifically asked for me. She's focused on me as the cause of all her problems. Maybe I can distract her enough for your people to act. Detective Rodriguez shook her head. It's too dangerous, Mrs. Parker. You're 66 years old, and she's armed and unstable. I'm also the only person here she has an emotional connection to, even if it's hatred, I argued. She sees me as the obstacle to everything she wanted. If I can get close enough to engage her personally, maybe I can give you the opening you need. The negotiator had been listening to our conversation. Actually, he said slowly, there might be merit to that approach. Personal engagement sometimes works when standard negotiation fails, but you'd be putting yourself in extreme danger. I looked up at the balcony where my son was being held at gunpoint by a woman I'd once welcomed into our family. At my age, I'd already lived a full life. Matthew was only 39, with decades ahead of him if I could help save him. I raised that boy by myself after his father died, I said firmly. I protected him from bullies in school. I worked double shifts to pay for his college, and I held him when his heart was broken. I'm not going to stop protecting him now just because I'm a senior citizen. After 20 minutes of heated discussion and careful planning, they agreed to let me approach the house. I would wear a wire so they could monitor the conversation, and snipers would be positioned to act if I could create any opportunity. Mrs. Parker, the SWAT commander said, as they fitted me with the communication device, if you can get her to move even 3 feet away from Matthew, we can end this safely. But don't try to be a hero. Your job is just to talk to her and see if you can create an opening. My hands were surprisingly steady as I walked up the beach house driveway. At 66, I'd never imagined I'd be walking into a hostage situation, but motherhood gives you strength you never knew you possessed. Samantha, I called out when I reached the base of the house. I'm here. Let's talk face to face. She appeared on the balcony again, still holding the gun to Matthew's head. Stay right there, she shouted. Don't come any closer. I want to understand, I said, projecting my voice so she could hear me clearly. Help me understand how we got here. You got us here, she screamed. You couldn't mind your own business. If you hadn't shown up that night, everything would have worked perfectly. You mean if I hadn't interrupted your plan to murder my son, I said, allowing anger to creep into my voice. Did you really think I'd just let that happen? He was supposed to die quietly. The insurance money, the business assets, I would have been a grieving widow and no one would have suspected anything. Matthew opened his eyes and looked down at me. Even from that distance, I could see him mouth the words, I love you. My heart nearly broke, but I forced myself to stay focused. What about the other men, Samantha? The other husbands you've defrauded? Was killing them part of your plan too? Her face twisted with rage. Those idiots deserved what they got, trusting pathetic men who thought they could buy love with their money. Like Matthew trusted you, I said. Like I trusted you. You sat at my dinner table, you called me Mom, you took my retirement money and used it to fund your escape plan. How could you do that to people who loved you? Love? She laughed bitterly. You call that love? Matthew loved the idea of me, not the real me. And you loved having a daughter-in-law to show off to your friends. None of you really knew who I was. You're right, I said, taking a small step closer to the house. We didn't know who you really were. We saw what you wanted us to see. But that doesn't justify attempted murder. It justifies everything, she shouted, and I noticed her grip on the gun shifting slightly. I've been taking care of myself since I was 16. I learned that the only person you can trust is yourself, and the only security comes from money. But you could have earned money honestly, I said, taking another small step. You're intelligent, you're organized. You could have built a real life instead of stealing other people's lives. Built a life doing what? Waiting tables? Working in an office? Hoping some man would take care of me? Her voice was becoming more hysterical. I found a better way. A better way that landed you in jail facing life in prison, I pointed out. How is that better? She was quiet for a moment, and I could see her thinking. The gun in her hand wavered slightly, and Matthew swayed dangerously close to the balcony railing. It doesn't matter now, she said finally. It's too late for all of us. It's not too late, I said urgently. You're young, Samantha. You could still turn this around. Let Matthew go, and maybe we can work something out. Work something out? She repeated, and there was something different in her voice now. Not just anger, but genuine desperation. I'm looking at life in prison, Margaret. There's nothing to work out. There might be, I said, taking another step closer. I was now at the base of the stairs leading up to the balcony. But not if you add another murder charge. Let my son go, and I promise I'll speak to the prosecutor about your cooperation. For a moment, I thought I might have reached her. The gun lowered slightly, and she seemed to be considering my words. Then her expression hardened again. You think I'm stupid? You think I don't know that you're just saying what I want to hear? I'm saying what I mean, I replied. I'm a 66-year-old retired school principal, Samantha. I don't lie to get what I want. If I promise to speak for you, I'll do it. She stared down at me for a long moment, and I could see the internal struggle playing out on her face. Then, suddenly, she made a decision that changed everything. Fine, she said. You want to save your son? Come up here and take his place. The request hit me like a physical blow, but I didn't hesitate. Okay, I called back. I'm coming up. As I climbed the stairs toward what might be my death, I heard Detective Rodriguez's voice through my earpiece. Mrs. Parker, do not comply. We can find another way. But I kept climbing. Matthew was my son, my only child, the most important person in my world. If trading my life for his was what it took, then that's what I would do. At 66, I was about to discover just how far a mother's love could take her. My legs felt like lead as I climbed the wooden stairs to the second-floor balcony. Each step brought me closer to my son and to the woman who had tried to destroy our family. At 66, I'd never been more terrified or more determined in my life. Stop right there, Samantha commanded when I reached the top of the stairs. Up close, she looked haggard and desperate, her usually perfect appearance disheveled. The gun in her hand was pointed directly at Matthew's temple. I'm here, I said, raising my hands to show I wasn't armed. Now, let him go. Not yet, she said, her eyes darting between me and the police officers positioned around the property. First, you're going to tell them to back off. Tell them to give me safe passage out of here. Matthew looked at me with a mixture of love and terror. Mom, don't do this, he whispered. Just walk away. I'm not walking away from you, I said firmly. I never have, and I never will. Samantha pressed the gun harder against his head. How touching. The devoted mother sacrificing herself for her precious son. Do you have any idea how pathetic that is? What's pathetic, I said, moving slowly closer, is a woman who thinks the only way to get what she wants is to steal it from people who love her. Love, she spat. You keep using that word like it means something. Love doesn't pay bills, Margaret. Love doesn't secure your future. Money does. And look where that philosophy got you, I replied. Standing on a balcony with a gun, facing life in prison, with everyone you've ever met knowing exactly who you really are. Her face flushed with rage. Shut up! You don't know anything about my life, about what I've been through. You're right, I don't, I said, taking another small step closer. But I know what you've put my son through. I know you stole his money, forged his signature, tried to destroy his business, and then attempted to murder him when he got too close to the truth. He was getting suspicious, she said, and for the first time I heard a note of regret in her voice. I tried to keep him distracted, tried to make him believe everything was fine, but he started asking questions about the accounts, wanting to see bank statements. So you decided to kill him rather than answer his questions, I said. That was your solution? It was the only solution, she screamed. If he'd exposed me, everything would have been ruined. Years of planning, months of preparation, all destroyed. I was now only about 6 feet from them, close enough to see the sweat on Matthew's forehead and the tremor in Samantha's hand. Through my earpiece, I could hear the SWAT commander coordinating positions, waiting for his shot. Samantha, I said gently, you're not a killer. I know you're not. The poisoning was meant to look like an accident. You didn't want to actually watch him die. You're not a cold-blooded murderer. Don't try to psychoanalyze me, she snapped, but her voice lacked conviction. I'm not analyzing you. I'm trying to save you, I said. Right now, you're facing attempted murder charges. If you hurt Matthew now, if you hurt me, you'll be looking at first-degree murder. There won't be any coming back from that. There's no coming back anyway, she cried, and I could see tears starting to form in her eyes. My life is over. Everything I worked for, everything I built, it's all gone. You could rebuild, I said urgently. You're intelligent, you're resourceful. Yes, you'll go to prison, but you're young enough to have a life after that. But only if you stop this now. The gun in her hand wavered, and Matthew sensed the momentary weakness. He started to pull away from her, but she quickly tightened her grip on him. "Don't move!" she yelled at him, then looked back at me. "You want to save him so badly? Fine. Come here and take his place. Let me put this gun to your head instead." "Mom, no," Matthew said weakly. "Please don't do this." But I was already moving toward them. "It's okay, sweetheart," I said to my son. "Everything's going to be okay." As I approached, Samantha roughly pushed Matthew away from her and grabbed my arm instead, pressing the gun against my temple. The metal was cold against my skin, and I could smell her desperation, a mixture of fear and fury. "There," she said triumphantly. "Now we're even, Margaret. Your life for his." Matthew stumbled backward, free but unwilling to leave. "Let her go, Samantha. This is between you and me." "No," she said, her grip tightening on my arm. "This is between me and the woman who destroyed my life." Through my earpiece, I heard Detective Rodriguez's voice. "We have a clear shot. Mrs. Parker, if you can move just 2 feet to your left." But I had a different plan. At 66, I might not be as strong or as fast as I once was, but I'd learned a thing or two about dealing with unstable people during my years as a school principal. "Samantha," I said calmly, "do you really want to kill me?" "What?" The question seemed to surprise her. "I'm asking you directly. Do you actually want to pull that trigger and watch me die?" She was quiet for a moment, and I could feel her uncertainty. I want this nightmare to end." "Then end it," I said. "Put the gun down and surrender. Face whatever consequences come, but don't add murder to your crimes." "I can't go to prison," she whispered, and now the tears were flowing freely. "I can't survive 20 years locked up." "You're stronger than you think," I said gently. "And you won't be alone. There are programs, support systems." "You'd help me?" she asked, and the question was so vulnerable, so childlike, that my heart almost broke for her. "I'd try," I said honestly. "Not because I forgive what you did to Matthew, but because you're a human being who made terrible choices. Everyone deserves a chance to make things right." For a moment, I thought I'd reached her. The gun lowered slightly, and her grip on my arm loosened. Then something changed in her eyes, a hardening, a final decision. "I'm sorry, Margaret," she whispered, "but I can't live with what I've become." In that instant, I realized she wasn't planning to kill me. She was planning to kill herself, and she wanted me close enough to be caught in the aftermath, to ensure that even in death, she'd cause maximum pain to our family. "Samantha, don't," I started to say, but she was already turning the gun toward herself. That's when my instincts as a mother, honed over decades of protecting my son, kicked in. Without thinking, I lunged forward, grabbing for the weapon as it swung away from me. The gun discharged with a deafening crack, and for a moment, everything was chaos, shouting, running footsteps, someone screaming. When the smoke cleared, I was on the ground with Samantha beside me, both of us alive, but shaken. The bullet had gone harmlessly into the wooden balcony railing, and within seconds, SWAT officers had swarmed the balcony. Samantha was in handcuffs, and Matthew was holding me tight against his chest as paramedics checked us both for injuries. "Mom," he kept saying over and over, "I can't believe you did that. I can't believe you saved her life, too." As they led Samantha away, she looked back at me one last time. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you stop me?" "Because," I said, still shaking from the adrenaline, "everyone deserves a chance to make things right, even you." The nightmare was finally over, but the real work of rebuilding our lives was just beginning. 6 months later, I sat in the courtroom as Judge Patricia Harrison read Samantha's sentence. The woman who had nearly destroyed my family looked smaller somehow, diminished by months in county jail and the weight of her crimes. "Samantha Klein," the judge said formally, "you have been found guilty of attempted murder in the 2nd degree, aggravated fraud, identity theft, bigamy, and racketeering."